Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and it is my 6th year anniversary on YouTube. Thank you all so much for sticking around. I really do appreciate it. Be just joining in right in the past 12 months or been since the very beginning in 2013. Again, I couldn't have gotten this far without you. But now into the matter at hand, the album from 2018 that y'all all wanted me to cover, from JPEGMAFIA, Veteran. Well, this won by a landslide this year. Seriously, it was not close whatsoever. The only real competition had about half as many votes, and that was Twin Fantasy by Car Seat Headrest. Don't worry, fans, I'll be handling the next Will Toledo album whenever he puts it out. I've just never been all that interested in covering a remake of a project I heard years ago. I was more excited about this. But in a sense, I'm a little bit baffled why I didn't cover JPEGMAFIA early in 2018. I think part of it might have been rooted in how the Patreon schedule just got out of hand and I couldn't find time to tackle it properly. One of the reasons I did shelve that scheduling for 2019, but might bring it back in the future with a little bit more containment and structure. But for another, what I did hear from JPEGMAFIA, I was more wary of than outright positive, because I actually did go back to some of his earlier projects and mixtapes, and my issues, they weren't due to the instrumental experimentation, taking a slightly more jagged, off-kilter approach to some slightly more conventional tones adjacent to an act-like clipping, and then just some idiosyncratic weirdness, but also more to the content, which seemed to land in a strange sort of very internet, meme culture, political provocation, which meant that certain points of insight and transgression just hit some weird notes, at least for me. Definitely an acquired taste. And that's not even getting into the messy controversy surrounding his now infamous song, I Just Killed a Cop, Now I'm Horny, in which actual audio of a policeman being killed was mixed into the song, and which requires a pretty layered conversation surrounding transgression, art, and the modern cultural role of police that probably does deserve to come up at a later date. I'm at least fascinated by it. And when you factor in some structural issues and a hit and miss record for hooks and grooves, I can see how his first two projects, titled Black Ben Carson and The Second Amendment, if you can't tell he was trying to be provocative, they might not have gotten the same critical acclaim that Veteran did 2 years later. Although I would add that Black Ben Carson has a certain nightmarish, amorphous quality that kind of reminds me of B. Dolan's The Failure, and I intend that as a compliment. I do think it's a surprisingly compelling and overall pretty great project. But from the outside, Veteran did look to be the most streamlined album to date, and certainly the one getting JPEGMAFIA the most critical acclaim in experimental hip-hop and out of it, so I was open to this kicking a lot of ass. So, alright, we're here. How about it? Going back to 2018, was JPEGMAFIA's Veteran worth it? Well, there's a part of me that feels like there's both more and less to get with Veteran than there actually is. The sort of album where I completely understand why folks might want me to try and break this down more in depth, but also the sort of album where I'm fairly certain they'd be missing kind of the point like that to do so. And that's the strange thing about Veteran. For as much as the echoing sample of You Think You Know Me serves as the producer tag here from JPEGMAFIA himself, he did produce the entire album, it also highlights a level of resistance to analysis that you're gonna face when getting into it that wasn't quite there on his earlier, more directly political, satirical, and lyrical projects. But there's been a stylistic shift here, and I'll admit while the themes and production mostly worked for me, JPEGMAFIA is one of those guys who has his own aesthetic lane when it comes to construction, and it's gonna be hit and miss how much I actually like it, with this album more so than ever. Because yes, it is good, but I'm not sure it's great. At least for me. And I want to start off with the content. And the most striking thought that came to mind when listening to this was not any comparison to any hip-hop like Death Grips or Clipping, but certain streaks of hardcore punk, especially an album like Damaged by Black Flag, where there was a mischievous, provocative streak in the insurrection, but ultimately broke down into much more serious questions about mental health and a curdled brand of nihilism. And JPEGMAFIA is more than willing to drill a fair bit deeper into the roots of all that, not just in highlighting his own status as a veteran coming back from a stint in Iraq and the running subtext of anxiety, depression, and possible PTSD behind it on songs like DD Form 214, Panic Emoji, and even my thoughts on NeoGaf Dying, which is both more and less about NeoGaf than you think, but also pointing a considerable amount of violence at targets spanning insecure alt-right shitheads wallowing in trolling hypocrisy behind a keyboard to self-professed liberals who will betray their ideals for an easy buck and who are just as insecure in their professions of virtue, but in a different way, like on the genuinely telling libtard anthem, Williamsburg, and especially Whole Foods. And while you can make the argument that in some cases JPEGMAFIA is just trolling, using stylized violence for effect as he'll dissolve into laughter at the end of Curb Stomp, the album closer, after howling his lungs out, or the jaunty brand of mockery on the aptly named I Cannot Fucking Wait Until Morrissey Dies, it's telling how he doesn't shy away from taking shots at 4chan to prove how the trolls themselves could be aggravated, or on cuts like 1488, you can tell at least some of the violence might be credibly backed up, and the alt-right or fascist targets are not ready for that sort of energy coming from him. Granted, calling this album progressive might be a little bit of a stretch, and that's some of the same conscious inconsistency I've seen with JPEGMAFIA before. Take a song like Baby I'm Bleeding, where he calls out Girl Pusher on his label for having a relationship with Antoine, giving his rape allegations, and then on the third verse he talks about taking your bitch, a pretty common line across a lot of this album, along with a cavalier approach to feminism that means he's gonna pistol whip your wife first. And here's the thing, he knows he's gonna get this sort of criticism from guys like me, and he seems fine with it. With a larger task at hand coming through and demolishing a broken system and getting what's his and what's rightly deserved, especially when the government would rather treat him with indifference or outright hostility despite being a veteran as a black man, and then sympathetic allies, we should just chill, don't overreact. But that nuance does seem a bit selective and unfocused, and not quite as layered or introspective as it could have come across on Black Ben Carson or the Second Amendment, especially when this album is at its best attacking the insecurities at the core of its subjects, be it his own insecurities or his targets. And I think one of the points that he might bring up is that there might be more common ground than some might think. But again, like with previous albums, the layers of irony, sarcasm, trolling, and frenetic blur of genuine rage can make parsing through this a bit of a tough task, especially given how the language and delivery can be so elastic, bending across more intricate flows, and even some melodies that show exactly where some of that cited boy band inspiration comes from, and yet so blunt that he'll howl like MC Ride or Denzel Curry. No surprise he's worked with Denzel Curry in the past. Of course, the big difference between JPEGMAFIA and those two comes in the production, where this album, even more than his last few, becomes more of a textural experience than straightforward songs or hooks. Sure, the album might seem to start with more conventionally inspired clattering trap grooves and twinkling melodies of 1539 North Calvert, but even that song starts quaking with bass and fracturing apart, which might be the most expected opener to the frenetic Old Dirty Bastard sample that howls across the background of the next song with even more aggressive bass-heavy percussion that then fractures into echoing washed-out guitar. And that becomes something of the pattern on this project, shuddering experimental skitters and contorted samples that might pull a little bit from industrial hip-hop, but likely owe more to an act like, say, Arca, before the bass will blow out and the song will break into either crushing abrasion, a more melodic tone that doesn't quite tonally match with anything and makes you question whether or not it's all a big joke, or a distorted, cavernous husk of effects that seem to reflect a much more haunted backdrop like on Panic Emoji, where you know it's not a joke. Hell, there's even a fair few points where this happens within the song, like on the ASMR saturated Rock and Roll is Dead or Germs. And again, I am familiar with these tones and the shuddering arrhythmic progressions, and outside of where the percussion that he chooses literally causes some excess shrill high-end frequencies to bleed into the mix, like a Macaulay Culkin and Rainbow Six, I can vibe with a lot of the instrumentals here and the creeping menace they would bring, but not really taken much more than that. And that might be my greatest point of frustration. On a project that is built to disorient and shock the audience, the lack of sharper structures or crescendos or even more composed melody or hooks doesn't give me many moments I'd return to or truly killer climaxes once you've grown accustomed to the texture, especially with his stream of conscious styleness of writing. Honestly, if there were just more tunes or not just warped interpolations or glassy fragments with a little bit more texture than body, there'd be more standouts here, at least for me. But as a whole, Look, okay, I like JPEGMAFIA's lane, and I do appreciate a rapper taking this many risks in terms of production and content. And there is a certain fractured, shrieking nightmare void where this album absolutely works. But it's also a project I feel I admire more than I outright love, mostly because of intentional internal contradictions. At least for me, a little bit more internal structure within the songs, they might make them click more strongly, kind of reminiscent of my frustrations with the last Solange album, albeit with a completely different tone and a few more consistent lyrical nuggets here. That being said, this is an album that is a lot stronger than the sum of its parts, which is why I'm giving it a solid 7 out of 10 and a recommendation. I am a little bit shocked that this was the album that broke him through beyond Anthony Fantano's review and a very well-placed Mike Seatown reference, but you know what, it's kind of encouraging to see JPEGMAFIA get enabled with this brand of experimentation. And I'm kind of fascinated where he's going to go next. Definitely somebody I'm going to watch, definitely a guy I'm going to be reviewing in the future. In the meantime, if you haven't heard this already, yeah, take the time, check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. Like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Once again, guys, I have to say thank you for staying subscribed to the channel, following me around for the past 6 years. The channel's been growing a little bit more slowly the past 2 to 3 years, but I have appreciated you guys coming on board and not immediately unsubscribing when I put out a more negative review, because that's happened a fair bit recently, and I'm aware of how contentious I can be. I'm okay with that. I'll just keep on trekking here. Beyond that, though, if you do want to buy or you want to stream the album, links are down there below. And speaking of me being contentious, the poll's right there. You know what to do. Have fun. And hey, the comments are down there too. Happy to hear from you guys and how long you've been subscribed to this channel. I'm honestly kind of curious how many of you guys have actually stuck around and what's kept you guys here. Really, I'm genuinely curious about that. I'm surprised more of you are not already gone. Beyond that, if you want to find me on social media where I'll rant about all sorts of other things, links in the description below. And if there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you're looking for the last episode of Billboard Breakdown, which went up yesterday, it's on right now on the second channel. Links in the card right over there. But till then, I'm Mark. You're watching Spectrum Pulse. Let's see if we can get this through another year. And I'll see you next time.